we leave you with some very lucky turkeys living it up at Swan Creek Metro Park in Toledo, Ohio. I'm Jane Pauley. We wish you and yours the happiest of Thanksgivings. Face the Nation is coming right up. And please join us when our trumpet sounds again next Sunday morning.
You make me happy. Here we go. Face the Nation.
I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, change is coming to Washington.
Change!
But as both parties try to move...
That was the same thing that Obama run off of, change, and the only kind of change that we got was a few dollars being exchanged for change. Imagine that.
Move past the chaos of campaigns 20 and 22, a certain former president is not on board with that. It was a seismic but not surprising announcement.
The hour's come for a new generation to lead the Democratic caucus.
It's a changing of the guard as Democrats move to the minority. That new generation is younger, more diverse, and untested when it comes to facing a potential barrage of Republican-led investigations.
They just give you one gavel with the power, and the power of subpoena as well. And we're going to use it.
But the Republican Party will have to deal with the fallout from Attorney General Merrick Garland's decision to name an outside counsel to oversee investigations of former President Trump.
Appointing a special counsel at this time is the right thing to do. The extraordinary circumstances presented here demand it.
We'll talk with the former Trump Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, as well as House Judiciary Committee Democrat Zoe Lofgren. Plus, the former vice president opens up to us about January 6th and the big issue dividing him and the former president.
The 2020 election is not stolen.
Finally, we'll take a look at turmoil in the tech world as Twitter teeters and crypto crashes. Tech watchers Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway will join us for analysis. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. To Face the Nation. There is some breaking news overnight from Colorado as we have learned that 5 people are dead and at least 18 others have been injured in a mass shooting at Club Q, an LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs. Now, police say they do have the alleged shooter in custody and the FBI is assisting with the investigation. We begin this morning with former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. He appointed Robert Mueller.
5 people dead. I don't know how many injured, but it's a reflection upon the failures of our government towards not being able to protect its own people here in America. There's a cornerstone out here on the edge of the property that basically dignifies those people that died illegitimately because of the government's failures. I don't know if anybody realizes that or not, but my brother and I, he died before we could complete the project, but I'd already bought in the monument and talked about it, that one side was going to be representing our military, pretending our father being in the military, but the other side was going to be the victims of all these mass shootings. That still to this day, we're not a bit more closer working with the NRA, our other Klansmen here in America that think that it's a cool thing for everybody to have 7, 8, 10 guns apiece. But we still keep falling into that same cloud of despair that the founder of the Windmill Ministries projected and put out to the 43rd President of the United States in 2005 in Davidson County by sending him a t-shirt stating of a bloody road ahead. You can look at the mass shootings since 2005 and do a pattern, and you will have unbelievable facts pertaining to the increasiveness that has occurred in exchange to that prediction. Once more, these are all areas going in the opposite direction towards peace and utopia that the Bible says will occur before the opening of the second seal. Wow. Unbelievable. We need to pray for all the victims that have relentlessly went through pain and agony just within the past 17 years since that advisory was put out about a bloody road ahead. We need to pray for all these victims that have been randomly killed for absolutely no reason other than a madman or a mad woman or the carelessness of cops or whatever killing people. And once you take that life, you can't bring that life back.
Special counsel for the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election and to determine if there were links between that country.
All right, I've done heard part of this right here, so because of it, I'm going to move on. I didn't much agree or appreciate the things that this individual had to say. If you are in doubt in listening to what he has to say, I advise you to look it up online and look it up on social media platform pertaining to the exchange of things that was said this morning on Face the Nation. This is 2022.
Charge him with tax and gun related crimes, and that is before the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, David Weiss. I believe you know him since he was a Trump appointee. Can he independently oversee this, or do we need another special counsel?
Well, yeah, this investigation, as you said, has been going on for a very long time, which is not good for anybody. It promotes conspiracy theories and suspicions. So my hope is the department will make a decision in the near future about whether to go forward, and hopefully that decision will be accepted by the public. I do believe that the U.S. Attorney in Delaware has the right experience to make that decision. So I think we can be confident that he'll make the right decision in that case.
Okay, so not in that case, but let me ask you about the content of what is being scrutinized here with the former president. I know when you were U.S. Attorney in Maryland, you dealt with individuals who took classified material, sometimes top secret SCI level clearances, and kept it at home, and you prosecuted them to the full extent of the law. Why should the president be any different?
Well, you're right. We did have a lot of federal agencies in Maryland, and so we had a number of cases that came up during my 12 years as U.S. Attorney, both under President Obama and President Bush. And we prosecuted those cases because we believe the facts justified it. Now, if the facts justify prosecution of President Trump, I think the department will make that decision. But we just don't know from the outside. There are extenuating circumstances when it's the president, when there are a lot of staffers and lawyers involved. And so I think we have to wait to see how that all shakes out.
Former Attorney General Barr sat with PBS. And this was right before Merrick Garland's announcement. But he said that to indict, the Justice Department needs to show Mr. Trump was consciously involved. Let's hear what he had to say.
I personally think that they probably have the basis for legitimately indicting the president. I don't know, I'm speculating. But given what's gone on, I think they probably have the evidence that would check the box. They have the case.
Do you agree?
Well, I don't know. I think the Attorney General Barr that is mentioned later in that interview that he was speculating. And I think it's, there are multiple levels of issues that the department needs to consider, Margaret. Number one is the evidence sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction? Number two is it an appropriate use of federal resources to bring that case? And a case against a former president obviously would be extraordinary, would raise unique concerns. And so I would hope that Merrick Garland and his team would be very careful about scrutinizing that evidence, not just checking the box, but making sure that they're prepared to stand behind the decision that they make.
So when you say sustain a conviction, what do you mean by that? Does that mean looking at the courts that are likely to prosecute? I mean, where would you prosecute this case? Florida or Washington, D.C.?
Well, it means ensuring that, number one, you get past a jury, that is, being able to persuade 12 random citizens that your case proves the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And number two, that it'll be sustained or upheld on appeal. You know, the department sometimes brings cases in which they use novel theories that prevail in district court but are overruled on appeal. If they're to bring a case against the former president, you want to make sure they had a lock-solid case and they were confident both of conviction and of prevailing on any appeal.
And that there wouldn't be some national security implication, such as political violence?
You know, that's a difficult issue, Margaret, as to whether or not the Attorney General should consider the potential for public unrest if they were to bring a case against the president.
It has to be considered.
I think it highlights the importance of the department ensuring.
According to his words, Nancy Pelosi, nobody's above the law. And according to that guy, he said, we will not be buffaloed. We will not be intimidated. We will not be blackmailed. We will not be railroaded in our decision towards going after Donald J. Trump in the crimes that he has committed. By them saying that, what they just said is contradictory towards what others have said. It actually turns our laws into a mockery by thinking that we're going to be dictated to and dominated to by thugs that is offering to commit violence. That was the whole primary purpose that I believe it was either Bush or Ronald Reagan that said that we do not negotiate with terrorists, but then turn right around and exchange how many guns for how many terrorists? Unbelievable. How wish-washy, two-faced, full of hypocrisy that our government has become. And you don't think that other countries can see this and identify this? Sure they can. If somebody like me that's a dropout in school can see it, you do the math.
Ensuring that they have a solid case.
You do the math.
That is, that they're going to win a conviction and they're going to be able to sustain an appeal. The circumstances, the stakes are higher than in an ordinary case. You need to make sure if you bring that case that you can persuade people that it's meritorious and that you deserve to win.
Well, that gets at the fundamentals of distrust of institution and where we are these days. But the former president has already said he's not going to comply with any investigations. He said that on Friday. So what does this mean for the timeline? Are we running right into the 2024 presidential campaign?
I'm concerned about the timing. Obviously, the new special counsel, Jack Smith, needs to get up to speed on the case. He's not even in the U.S. He needs to come back and get engaged and supervise his team. He may need to bring in additional team members, people he trusts, to review the circumstances. And then there are other potential delays as well. You know, one of the downsides of appointing a special counsel is the possibility of litigation over the validity of the appointment of the special counsel. Now, that has always been upheld by the courts, but litigation can impose additional delays. So I think there's a fair chance that this is going to drag in well into the campaign season.
And then the question of whether the candidate wins or not. Rod Rosenstein, thank you for your insight and for joining.
Which will be another hindrance, tormentive, stumbling block that we as the people will have to suffer through towards not only watching a dog chasing after its tail towards moving but never getting nowhere, but basically a group of people that are not initiating the needs and the wills of the people because of this distraction that Donald J. Trump has created in our system. I am just about convinced that this burden, this stumbling block, will not come to an end even after Donald J. Trump kicks the bucket, preferably with natural causes. But I'm just saying, because of what he has stirred up in our democracy, these are issues that will still come up 10 years from now, or possibly 20 years from now, after he's put in a sarcophagus somewhere that where don't nobody see him on a day-to-day level. You got corruption trying to cover up more corruption. You got the blind leading the blind, and you got chaos because of that, in which what got stirred up originally pertaining to the Reagans and the Bushes in the late 80s. But no one wants to talk about that. We want to discuss whether or not we're going to give the Saudis the right to be exempt in immunity clauses towards not being held liable for not only the journalists, but not being liable for the bombing of the Twin Towers that killed almost 3,000 people, that has now brought the oil market to its knees in driving the prices up, driving the prices of food up, and in some cases actually ruining people's lives. And these people are still not being held to the full extent of the law, just like Donald J. Trump is still not being held to the fullest extent of the law. What law? Is it even a law? Or do they just make up these laws as they go, and whoever that they're going to enforce these laws onto, they enforce them, and whoever they don't want to enforce these laws onto, they don't enforce them? So once more, this is a wake-up call to the words of Nancy Pelosi that no one is above the law. Really? Really? It's a joke. But it's a very, very horrible joke whenever it comes to justice. Because whenever our Constitution says for all, it means for all. But we see that that's obviously not the point here now, is it? It's sad. It's sad, and I guarantee you right now our ancestors are rolling around in their graves because of some of the stuff that has happened and being said and being done right in front of our very eyes, and people are getting away with it. It's disgraceful, it's distasteful, and it's a travesty that until we, the people, stand up against this type of abuse, it's just going to continue, and it's going to fester, and it's going to be a burden, it's going to be a hindrance, it's going to be it's going to be a disaster, a stumbling block.
Thank you.
Before the appointment of a special counsel was announced last week, we spoke with former Vice President Mike Pence about his new book, So Help Me God. In our wide-ranging conversation, Mr. Pence details extensively his story up to and including the January 6th attack.
The president's words and actions in and around January 6th were reckless. The tweet that he issued the day that I was in the loading dock below the United States Senate endangered my family and endangered people that were in the Capitol, and was indefensible.
Why did it take you 2 years to talk about your anger? Weren't you incandescent with rage that your family was put at risk like that?
Margaret, I was angry that day, and many days since. But on January 6th, I have to tell you that I had to put that aside. The president had decided to be a part of the problem. I was determined to be a part of the solution, to work with leaders in Congress, leaders at the Pentagon, leaders in law enforcement, to do our part to finish our work under the Constitution.
You were calling and trying to get the National Guard to come in and restore order. Did you feel you had to do that because the commander-in-chief was derelict in his duties?
Margaret, I didn't know what the president was doing at the time. I wasn't at the White House. I had no contact with the president or the White House that day. When I spoke to the congressional leaders in our first conference call,
he wasn't the president. He was the prior president. You need to put things into proper perspective. He was not the president whenever all that hullabaloo took place. The election was over.
Informed me that they were getting mixed messages from security personnel. And I asked them if they wanted me to get involved. And they did.
Do you think President Trump needs to be held responsible in his events, in the events that led to January 6th and the violence of that day?
Well, I think everyone that perpetrated the violence at the Capitol needs to be held to the strictest account.
Well, what about those who fed it? What about those who gave it oxygen, the lie oxygen, to mislead people?
I'm confident that the American people will hold all those responsible at the end of the day, and history will be their judge. You know, in my book, what I tried to do is share a candid story about the evolution of that controversy. The president and I had
the president
developed
came to you at least 5 times. You lay it out in detail leading up to January 6th, and it's almost like you couldn't believe this because you kept telling him over and over, this is not legal, this is not constitutional. Do you look back and say, I wasn't forceful enough? And what could you have done differently?
Well, I did tell the president many times that after he exhausted every legal challenge that the campaign had every right to pursue, that he should simply accept the results. The president was hearing from a cadre of attorneys who, frankly, should never have been left on the White House grounds, let alone in the Oval Office, telling him what, as the Bible says, his itching ears wanted to hear. My hope was that at the end of the day, he would come around. I remember on the night of January 4th, we had a meeting with the president and part of that legal team in the Oval Office. The president left on the helicopter. There were no harsh words between us, but he was continuing to make his case, and I was continuing to make my position clear. But at his rally in Georgia, which I watched on television, the president actually opened the rally by speaking about me.
I hope that our great vice president comes through for us. He's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
But then he paused, and he said to the crowd, no, one thing you know about Mike Pence is he always plays it straight.
And then he called you the next day.
I remember in that moment thinking, he might be coming around.
But he wasn't.
My continued hope was that at the end of the day, he would recognize what our duty was on that day as the presiding officer under the Constitution to oversee the count of the electoral vote of an election that we lost. But it was not to be.
Will you answer questions about that day before Congress?
Congress has no right to my testimony. We have a separation of powers under the Constitution of the United States. And I believe it would establish a terrible precedent for the Congress to summon a vice president of the United States to speak about deliberations that took place at the White House.
So you're closing the door on that entirely?
I'm closing the door on that. And
in other words, he's already pleading the fifth. And the reason why he's pleading the fifth, because he don't want to be put on the stand towards being held in between a hard place and a rock, towards telling the truth, nothing but the truth, the whole truth, so help him God. Because he knows that this was an inside job, a plot from the very beginning, that his boss, and he can say whatever he wants to about Congress, that his boss was planning to do just exactly what had occurred. So because it would interfere with his political agendas, he wants to stay off the limelight into the side on the sidelines. That way it don't affect any future repercussions or future steps that he may take in the limelight. Now, how two-faced is that? That talks about wanting to be a subservient unto the people towards doing the will of the people, but yet now he's willing to mask this up the way that he is towards saying, you know what, I'm pleading the fifth. This ain't right. Congress don't have no right. Basically putting down the guidelines. And the thing about it is, he was hired by the people, and he should be accountable by the people. The same way as his boss, Donald J. Trump. And you can either agree with that or not. But that's my feelings about it. Because this half-heartedness and these untruthful truths and not answering the whole question in the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God, they're violating it almost every day by giving answers. They're not actually answering the question directly. They're answering it indirectly, but it still leaves room for them to say, well, I answered the question. Well, you didn't answer the actual question. He goes over to say, well, I'm sure the American people will hold him responsible. Well, how can the American people hold him responsible if the people underneath the president don't hold him responsible? That begins with you, Vice President. It begins with you. If you're not willing to do your job that the people assigned and paid for you to do, does the people really have a chance? Does the people really have a chance unless they do like they done January the 6th towards bringing in such of a disturbance that this is the only way to get it on the front burner? Now that speaks volumes about our government officials. It really does.
But I must say again, the partisan nature of the January 6th committee has been a disappointment to me.
The lawyers and the chief of staff to the president at the time, that Mark Meadows, who let those lawyers, you said, had no business on the White House grounds. You think no consequence? Only prosecute the people who actually physically went to the Capitol?
There are those that are speaking in defense of people that rioted at the Capitol and created the conditions where lives were lost. But I believe everyone that was rioting in the Capitol that day and perpetrating violence needs to be held to the strictest account of the law. But I do believe that at the end of the day, the American people will hold accountable.
How can they? How can the American people hold not only those people accountable, but how can they hold the people accountable that actually masterminded this, that performed this, if the people underneath the president aren't willing to do their jobs for the people? We can't. That's the catch-22. That's where we're at as Americans in a broken system, a illegitimate government.
And those that permitted the circumstances around which January 6th was able to flourish into violence that day.
You also think the FBI executing a search warrant to take classified material from the former president's home was not the way the Justice Department should have handled it. But to be clear, were you ever personally concerned about Mr. Trump's handling of classified information?
I don't recall ever being concerned about the president or anyone in our administration's handling of classified information. At least among the senior staff, of which I had regular contact.
But if he had, he would be prosecuted, you would think.
Well, let me say, no one is above the law.
They say these nice words. They're elegant words, but they don't mean a damn thing. Not only did the president violate certain ethnic rules by taking the material and basically stealing it, but he was asked, could you please return those documents? he did not return the documents. At that point in time, that was a premeditated crime. That was a premeditated crime towards not exposing them documents back over to the will of the people. And I'm just going to say this, if me or you or anybody else of any type of local election would have plotted that we was going to go after the people that didn't get out of office, that we felt like they should have gotten office, and we stirred up such of a calamity as this in any of these local courthouses, I guarantee you we would have been already thrown completely, totally under the jail. Anybody that was plotting to overthrow the government or overthrow the decision of the people of a government would have been thrown under the jail.
But as someone that served on the Judiciary Committee for more than 10 years, having oversight over the Justice Department, I just think there were many better ways to obtain those classified materials from Mar-a-Lago than to execute a search warrant against a former president of the United States of America, something that had never happened in American history, Margaret.
And
how could you if the president wasn't willing to give them up? That once more, at that time, was not the president. He was only the prior president. He cannot no longer go under the pretense of the immunity clauses pertaining to the executive privileges, because at that point in time, he is no longer the president of the United States. They're confused. They don't know what the shit they're doing. They don't know what the shit they're talking about. And they're basically making a mockery out of our courts.
Been prosecuted. Do you think that should happen?
You wouldn't have seen nothing like this during the impeachment of the Nixon era. You wouldn't have seen nothing like this. They put him on the spot real quick, buddy. We're fixing to go after you, and we're going to put the chokehold on you. If you leave and leave quietly, we won't pursue it. But if you don't, we fixing to bury you. That was a completely different group of people that was in charge, that didn't mind taking charge over something that was being done against the will of the people. Today, they talk the talk, but they're not walking the walk. You see the difference in then versus now? A crime is a crime. No matter what kind of crime.
Look, my hope is that the Justice Department will think very carefully about next steps. I mean, this is a very divided time in the life of our nation. I think our nation needs to heal. But the idea of executing a search warrant against a former president of the United States sent the wrong message to the American people, and frankly sent the wrong message to the wider world that looks at the United States of America as the standard. And that was my disappointment in the decision to execute a search warrant.
And there will be more of our conversation with the former vice president just ahead. But we turn now to California Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren. She serves on the Judiciary Committee and the Select Committee investigating January 6th. Good morning to you, Congresswoman. I want to get straight to it. Does the refusal of the vice president and the former president to comply with your investigation in any way impede the impact or outcome?
Well, we wish they had come in. Certainly other presidents have come in when asked by the Congress, including Gerald Ford, Teddy Roosevelt, many others. It is almost Thanksgiving, and the committee turns into a pumpkin at the end of December. So we don't have time to litigate this, but I think they've cheated history, and they should have done otherwise. We, on the other hand, have received substantial information from other sources, And we're in the process of, as I'm sure you know, writing our report now.
And you're continuing to gather information, as I understand it, speaking to 2 Secret Service officials recently. What more do you need, and are you still sharing that information with the Justice Department?
Well, we're not sharing information with the Justice Department. We're doing our own investigation. However, we anticipate when our report is released to release all of the evidence that we have assembled so the public can see it, including the Department of Justice.
Okay, but you have, I understand the committee has released documents to the Department of Justice. Is that not the case?
Well, we're not, we're doing our own investigation.
Right.
And within a month, the public will have everything that we've found, all the evidence, for good or ill. And I think we've, as we've shown in our hearings, made a compelling presentation that the former president was at the center of the effort to overturn a duly elected election, assembled the mob, sent it over to Congress to try and interfere with the peaceful transfer of power. It's pretty shocking.
Well, as we know, the Justice Department has its own investigation, and that's what led us to the Attorney General making news just a few days ago with this special counsel to take up the events surrounding January 6th. But what does putting this in the hands of a special counsel accomplish here? Do you think it actually removes politics, or does it still just keep it there since the Attorney General will still have oversight of the special counsel?
Well, I think from what the Attorney General said, he sought to depoliticize this investigation. Obviously, career professionals are doing it, and to have a special counsel overseeing it. But, you know, the right wing never fails. Up is down and down is up. The effort to depoliticize, they're now criticizing as somehow a political measure. So, you know, the effort to
depoliticalize something would be the same thing as saying decriminalizing something. Okay? There's really not no way that you can take these events that happen and take them out of the arena of the political arena, because the political arena represents we the people. Once more, it's backtalk, it's twisted, fancy words that, as far as I'm concerned, these people have no idea what they're doing, why they're doing it, and who they're actually working for. They're not supposed to be working for a cover-up system. It's not supposed to be some sort of a syndicate mob that's being run like a syndicate mob to the point that you don't go up against the great Oz that's in behind the curtain, because if you do, you're going to suffer the consequences for questioning the great Oz. He's not supposed to be the great Oz, the Wizard of Oz. He's supposed to be our president. The vice president is supposed to be our vice president. And the people working under those two men are supposed to govern what they do, when they do it, why they do it, etc., etc. And if they don't, then the will of the people is no longer functioning as a free, open, fair democracy. Then it becomes an hypocrisy, or whatever word that I'm trying to use here, but it becomes a scandal. It becomes a scandal to a broken system that now is basically operating against the will of the people.
Partake as if, you know, it's a slice of pizza. I mean, it's not up to him. He is being investigated for his offenses, and we'll see what they find.
You sit on the Judiciary Committee. You just heard Rod Rosenstein say that he thinks the U.S. Attorney in Delaware is sufficient in terms of being able to independently decide on what to do with Hunter Biden and that case. I wonder if you agree with that, or if you think your Republican colleagues are right to ask for a special counsel to deal with the current president's son.
Well, I don't know anything about that case. Certainly in the case of.
But you have oversight of the Justice Department.
Yeah. Yes, but we don't, I serve with Mike Pence on the Judiciary Committee. We don't oversee and interfere with individual investigations and cases. That would be improper in terms of oversight. If the president's son has committed offenses, then, there'll be a judgment on whether to prosecute or not. And that's the rule of law, just as the rule of law applies to the former president. People in this country have to adhere to the law. And, if you don't.
You remember the movie Gladiator? There towards the end, whenever Russell Crowe was imprisoned, they had him in chains. And one of the senators come in there to talk to him about a plot or a coup. And he told them that because the system had become so corrupt and so tainted, that there was basically no other way to try to clean it up other than through Russell Crowe. You remember that? That's where we're at here in America pertaining to our government. It's become so twisted and so tangled and so corrupt to where now one thing overlaps another thing that contradicts the very first thing, and now you're dealing with a mess.
Truthsayers.
We will be watching, Congresswoman. Thank you. Face the Nation will be back in a minute.
My A1C stayed here.
Proof is in the pudding that this thing has been turned upside down. And they're going to get up there for the next 2 years, and they're going to haggle, and they're going to debate.
Dr. Anthony Fauci will be retiring by the end of this year, but not before.
And they're not going to be able to accomplish the needs of the people.
At America.
That's the sad part about it. And a free, fair, open democracy is not supposed to be run that way. Yeah, there's been hiccups through other presidencies, through other generations, but they handled it. They got it in behind them, and it went on. This will be haunting the American people. Like I said a while ago, after Donald Trump is dead and gone, this will still be debatable and bringing up and being influential in our affairs. That is basically, instead of helping to heal our country, it's actually added more insult to misery towards bringing more grief to the country.
Watch the full Face the Nation. You can set your DVR or watch on our CBS News streaming network throughout the day on Sundays.
If you're over 50, imagine you could.
A lot of commercials, Margaret. Lot of commercials. I about decided that the people that come out on top of these elections for the past 30 plus years has been the media. The people that gets paid the big bucks to unravel this controversy. This chaos.
How real is the threat of a nuclear disaster or an attack somewhere in the world? 60 Minutes sits down with the person who knows best. Tonight on CBS.
You can always count on Heartland News.
Illinois. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We also spoke with former Vice President Pence about the former president's entrance into the 24 presidential campaign and the prospects for his own run.
I look forward to being involved in the process in some way. You know, whether we are in the debate as a candidate or in the debate simply as an active Republican. I look forward to getting behind the Republican cause and supporting candidates around the country, as well as our nominee, to get this country turned back to the policies that'll make us strong and prosperous again.
That sounds like you prefer he's not the nominee, but you didn't say no.
Well, I just think there'll be better choices.
Mm-hmm.
I think now calls for a different time. I think the American people will want to see us move forward.
You talk about moving forward. The idea of relitigating the 2020 election continues to circulate, as you know that, amongst members of your party. Do you think that continuing to push these claims, as the former president does, is a direct threat?
The 2020 election was not stolen. We have a process in this country where states conduct elections. Questions of irregularities or fraud are then adjudicated in the courts. The states then certify electoral votes, and as we did on January 6th. But I do think there's been far too much talk questioning the integrity of our election.
According to a CBS tally, there are going to be 156 members of Congress that will be sworn in January who continue to raise questions about the validity of the 2020 election. That's more than back in 2020. Isn't that a risk? Doesn't the party need to stop that?
There's a First Amendment in this country that people can hold the opinions that they hold, even if I disagree with them. But I have every confidence that the new Republican leadership in the Congress, the new Republican majority, when Nancy Pelosi hands the gavel to Kevin McCarthy, is going to draw the lessons from the midterm campaign, which for me give evidence of the fact that that the American people want the Republican Party, and frankly all of our leaders, to be focused on the future.
Mm-hmm. Did it surprise you then that Republicans didn't end up with a larger margin?
I was surprised. I was disappointed at the outcome of the election. As you look around what happened on Election Day, candidates that were focused on the future, candidates that were focused on the issues that the American people are focused on, did quite well.
You're very proud of the Supreme Court justices put on the court who just recently struck down Roe versus Wade.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the decision on abortion access should stay in the states, or should there be a national law banning it?
From very early on in my public career, I was determined to be a champion for life. I just always purposed to advance the sanctity of life. And I always believed that Roe v. Wade would be sent to the ash heap of history.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that Ruth Bader Ginsburg even said, who was one of the great Supreme Court justices.
Well, she
of our
questioned
time.
the legal basis.
She
not
questioned
being
the legal
solid
foundation
enough.
of
But,
it, and she was right. But
does
my
what you're talking
perspective-
about, the moral imperative,
yes.
does that trump states' rights?
Well, the Dobbs decision really gave the country a new beginning for life. And it did return the question of abortion to the states and the American people. Many alarmists on the American left in the beginning spoke about it banning abortion and taking away the right. And actually, I think most Americans figured out pretty quickly that, in fact, this question that bears so...
You hear me quite frequently talk about the baby boomers, pointing at the adults that basically has brought us to this point. The adoption Roe versus Wade was abused, taken advantage of, and taken out of its proper perspective in the original intent of why that people ever decided to even authenticate the legalness of taking an unborn child's life based around incest, rape, and the endangerment to either the child or the mother or both. Once more, all these fancy words are just exactly that. It creates more confusion. And I think that now you can understand the reason why that I've said many and many a time that for the past 30 plus years, the way that I have looked at it pertaining to our elections, yeah, we have an election. We act like that it was a decent election after the election, or most of the time we do. But then, whenever it's all said and done with, who are the ones that gets hurt and who are the ones that remain in power? Now, you can dress the horse up in any color you want, whether or not he's a white horse or a black horse. But if you're still using the same horse by only coloring the horse up like the Wizard of Oz horse with many colors, you still got the same horse. Only thing you've done was color the horse up a little differently. You've taken the horse off of one mantle, put him on another mantle to be looked at by the people, and then once the people makes their decision, you take that horse off, if that was the decision by the people, and you take that horse and you put him on this mantle and you color that horse up. But it's still the same horse. It's the powerful, it's the rich, it's the 1%ers that are still dominating the 99%ers, and it's the 1%ers that now are the elite that has driven or let down the American people by selling the American people out and basically working for themselves more so than the people, because it's the proof. Once more, the proof is in the pudding. If things was being handled effectively and efficiently, we would not be in the shape that we're in right now by our politicians. So all this rambling, all these fancy ass words are just exactly that. That's all it is. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you know who's going to be in power? The same people that are in power today. The wealthy, the rich, the elite, the conglomerates. They'll dress themselves up. It's not any different than a business down the road, a local business down the road that can't make their ends meet, and all of a sudden they file for bankruptcy. File for bankruptcy, and then turn around 6 months later and open the very business back up again, using a different name, but having the same employees. It's the same thing. It works on the same principle. You hadn't changed nothing.
I think it's most likely that it will be resolved at the state level, but the 15-week legislation in the Congress, had I been a member of Congress, I would have supported, because I think it actually...
That's not too liberal for you, because it would allow access up to 15 weeks of pregnancy.
Well,
that's where the majority of abortions are performed.
I would have supported it as a beginning.
The Rubio-Graham bill, the 15 weeks you're talking about, also has exceptions for life of the mother after the 15 weeks.
I supported those exceptions during my public career, but Margaret, I do believe it's more likely this is going to be resolved at the state level. It may take as long to restore the sanctity of life to the center of American law in all 50 states as it did to overturn Roe versus Wade. But people that know me and my family know that so long as we live, we'll seek to be about the business of life in this country and doing our part to support sanctity of life.
I was interested to read that you and your wife, Karen...
But yet now we support the Saudi Arabians over there that we know for a fact had something to do with 9/11 and killing a journalist and basically bombing Yemen over there and bombing schools and weddings and stuff like that. But yet now America talking out of both sides of his mouth towards, oh, we support life. Really? Do we? And we're selling Saudi Arabians all these missiles? We support life, knowing what they're going to do with those missiles?
I called home, driving off to a work appointment, and Karen answered the phone and said, "Happy Father's Day." And our son would come along, then a daughter, then another daughter, all within 3 years. And we were busy but joyful. But in the midst of all of that, we also received word that we had we had made the list for an adoption for a young woman with an unexpected pregnancy. But we wanted to find out if the second family on the list was clinically infertile. And when we did, we stepped aside, not wanting to prevent them from having the joy of a little one in their home. But I fully support fertility treatments, and I think they deserve the protection of the law.
What about same-sex marriage? A number of Republicans are getting on board federal protections for it. Do you believe that you need to consider that when you talk about compassion?
Well, as a Bible-believing Christian, I'll always hold the view that marriage is between one man and one woman.
Amen.
It was ordained by God.
Now, he nailed it there.
And that'll always be my values. But the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled on this in the Obergefell case. And
So you don't think a federal law is needed, like a number of Republicans
we can
are now?
disagree with Supreme Court decisions, but we can't disobey them. I respect the pronouncements of the court. And I actually think it's just as important as we go forward as a nation that we make it clear that we don't believe in discrimination against anyone because of who they are, who they love, or what they believe. But at the same time, I think we need to make sure that we protect the religious freedom of every American that's enshrined in the Constitution, the ability to live, to work, to worship in a manner according to the dictates of your conscience.
Our full interview can be seen on our website at facethenation.com and on our YouTube page.
Boy, do I ever have a mouthful to say after that. That everybody has the entitlement of living according to our Constitution pertaining to whatever religion that they believe. Well, if that be the case, how come that the founder of the Windmill Ministries, which is talking to you right now, in behind this camera, was attacked by Homeland Security? The anointing was not only attacked in what actually occurred in the 9 tapes going to the White House that helped the Reagans to establish the ending of the Cold Wars. That was a big no-no right there. Whenever they didn't reveal the whole truth and get the backing of the churches pertaining to what that they have been teaching now for, I guess, over 100 years or more about the one world government and the new world order and the Antichrist and the mark of the beast and 666 and the 2 witnesses and the false prophet and opening of the seals and manifestation of the prophecies coming true out of the last chapter of Daniel. They talk about these talks, but nobody was willing to initiate those talks in 1988. That's whenever those 9 tapes come back to me. And there was a letter that said, this is your private matters. Keep them. So I kept them. But I also knew what went on in the exchange between the Russians and the superpowers because I was keeping an eye on the news. Then, to top it off, in 1989, whenever I got penalized around here locally for telling people about the apocalypse, after my son and I went to Washington, D.C. and New York City and coming back, and then I went back to Washington, D.C. by myself. The second time that I was up there was whenever Homeland Security followed me from Washington, D.C. down to Tennessee, and in Madison County, Tennessee, in Jackson, Tennessee, they confiscated something from the ministry that they shouldn't have. After the second time, I made a third trip to Washington, D.C., once more by myself. No committee, no congregation, no support team, in opposing that in which what I know that the government was was involved in towards having that ministry shut down. A matter of fact, not only did they shut it down towards confiscating the sword, but put me in a mental institution for about a 2-week period. Whenever I got out of that, I went back to Washington, and that's whenever I wound up on the White House lawn, and that's whenever they wound up arresting me, taking me to, I think it's St. Elizabeth's, whatever up there, mental institution in Washington, D.C., left my truck in the parking lot, and that's whenever I was left basically to die at the will of some doctors that was probably paid off by the government, that to this day I still believe I was physically, biologically poisoned. Poisoned to the degree that whenever I fell out on the gurney, my vital signs was supposed to have steadily declined to the point of death. But instead, the Lord had his hand on my life. I laid there. It seemed like for 10 or 15 minutes, whatever it was that they had given me did not work. And as soon as I sat up on the table which they had me to lay on, that I was supposed to have died on, the nurse that was in the little room with the doctor, this was in this little bitty room, fainted. She went to her knees, she collapsed, she fainted, and the doctor freaked out and immediately got a bunch of other nurses in there to help that nurse, and they took me out of that room and took me to the visitation room, or to the front foyer where all the other patients was, and that's where I remained for 72 hours, and then after that I was released. I was released. I come back home. I thought about it, because I'd already been on 3 major crusades. That's whenever I took the model back to the guy that I bought it from over in Mason Hall. I think I paid $1,200 for the model, and I think in return, after using it all summer long, he gave me back $750 or $800 for the model. We disattached it, took it out of the truck, and it was back his again. And in exchange of that, I also gave him the apocalypse sign that I had made over in Paducah, Kentucky, that costed me almost another $100 at the time whenever I had the sign made. Throw that into the pile. What did he do with the apocalypse model? Supposedly sold it to somebody. I don't know if it was a senator or congressman or somebody, had something to do with politics, and supposedly that same model is down in Atlanta, Georgia, in a museum down there that gets looked at periodically almost every day pertaining to the apocalypse. The apocalypse model that individual in Mason Hall at the time was an arts and crafts guy. He had just got through coming from Florida. He'd been working the circus down in Florida, the circuit down there towards basically with the carnivals and stuff. He decided to come to Mason Hall and display his work. I liked his work. I bought some of his work, and I used some of his work. In the exchange of me being out there on the road, passing out thousands and thousands of dollars worth of material that my son and I worked towards the First Crusade, going all the way up into Manhattan and New York and Queens and Harlem and Long Island and etc., in addition to Washington, D.C. and all up and down the coast there. We spent all summer and actually went into the fall, parts of the fall. After I went back up there the 3rd time and they tried to kill me, I decided to come back home and basically play dead. And those that hear me may say, play dead? What's he talking about? I was taught in a pond over here less than 1,000 yards from where I'm at right now that my grandfather and my great-grandfather dug. One of the games that we would play in children growing up and swimming in that pond was called the Dead Man's Bluff. And you would basically roll over with your face down and your belly down into the water. You would hold your breath and you would not move a muscle. And some people that was watching you would actually freak out. I remember I done it one time with my mother in the living room. I knew that she was watching me, and I acted like that I quit breathing. And I done this for a period of about 3 minutes because I could hold my breath whenever I was a kid. I done it almost every day. I don't know why I done it, but I can almost hold my breath for 3 whole minutes without becoming nauseated or a fainting type situation. And I remember I freaked her out, and she jumped up and come to me and started rolling me over and wanting to know, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? And that's whenever I said to her, oh, Mom, ain't nothing wrong with me. I'm playing dead man's bluff. But she got mad, naturally, about me scaring her like that. But I had learned through that occasion, it happened in the first, second, and third crusade of the same year, to play dead man's bluff. In other words, whenever they hit you and hit you hard, bow down, duck down, dig down. Wait till the coast is clear, then stand back up and do it again. Whenever the public would attack you or the government would attack you, state government, federal government, whenever the heat got too hot, bow down again. Shut up. Play dead man's bluff. I have done this periodically now for about 10 different times. Some of the persecutions only lasted for a few hours, a few days, but some actually was intense towards exceeding almost into a year. I've had 3 major federal studies that basically took 6 months out of my life each study. I never was committed. Why wasn't I committed? Because I was not crazy. Though a lot of people around here in this neighborhood would still like to declare me as me being crazy because of my convictions with religion. But I was smart enough to know when to stand up, and I was smart enough to know when to sit down and shut up. And I had to wait this thing out now for 30 some odd years of being abused this way, including the worst abuse was whenever I come back to Tennessee in 2014, and basically the Weakley County courts in dereliction of duty did not protect the family of James Robert Jackson in not only the beginning phases of the children's lives being raised up here in Weakley County, Tennessee, but there towards the last, they failed to protect the family even then. Towards basically allowing for these people to hunt us, terrorize us, torment us, dehumanize us in the way that they tried to do. And now, since it's turned around, the tables has turned, now the people that rightfully deserve to be embarrassed, deserve to be shamed, deserve to be ridiculed, isn't the founder that was trying to help them the whole time, but it was those that did not support and believe in the founder that now various circumstances has arisen pertaining to various things that one day these same people are going to give an account for. Not just the abusiveness that either they done or they allowed to happen to this family, but those that did not have enough, whatever you want to call it, to look into the subject matter and what I was teaching at the time, just to see and to hear me out towards what if this man was telling the truth about this crown that was given to him. We know that he had a white horse. We know that a crossbow had something to do with the death of his brother, to the point that his father got rid of the crossbow, indicating that he had a bow. How come there wasn't nobody that was willing to investigate this? Well, same reason why. How come didn't nobody investigate pertaining to global warming? And the reason why so many people was dead set in not doing nothing about it. And now it's caught up with them. They've been blindsided. It has taken 30 plus years after standing up, sitting down, standing up, sitting down, standing up, sitting down, till finally putting us where we are today with the January 6th attempted coup that Donald J. Trump masterminded. To this day still has not been fully accounted for the things not only that he done in the Republican Party, but going back 30 plus years ago with the Reagans and the Bushes, that still has not been fully accounted for. In the meantime, our government gives the Saudi Arabians immunity towards still backing them and supporting them, and I guess still selling them missiles to where they can bomb whoever that they want to bomb. It doesn't matter if it's a funeral, it doesn't matter if it's a wedding, it doesn't matter if it's a school. But yet, no, we got to listen to somebody get on the news and lie and tell us that they're about love and they're about life. These people ain't about life. These people ain't about peace. They're wicked. They're monsters.
Post restrictions of the pandemic, because many of the crime prevention programs shut down due to COVID.
You disclosed back in September that you yourself were a victim of burglary at your home, and you had 2 guns stolen at that time. And I wonder, did you have those guns because you felt unsafe in your own home? And did you go out and purchase new weapons?
I have not purchased new weapons. I had 2 handguns. I had owned them for a very, very, very long time. And I certainly believe in an individual's right to legally possess guns and properly store them. Mine were...
Boy, did they ever take advantage of my situation after I was put in jail, falsely accused by this community of killing my own brother, falsely accused of the courts towards stalking an individual that lived across the road that had 3 children that my brother and I had already contacted the welfare and the abuse center, either in Nashville and in Weakley County too, both. But did they ever take advantage of me towards coming in here? And I take responsibility towards allowing for them to come in here. I gave the guy the permission to come onto the property because at the time I was very vulnerable. I was suffering. I was let down by my people. I was let down by the judicial system, and I was grieving over my brother's death. And all of this had hit me all at one time, to the point that I was not making rational decisions towards allowing for this individual to come into my dwelling and start living on this property. You know, whenever you're under pressure, whenever you're under fire, whenever you're in the heat of the moment, that's whenever you depend upon other people to help you through those measures. And of course, whenever I called my son towards wanting him to help me to get out of jail towards making bond, supposedly he still owed some money on a piece of property down in Memphis, Tennessee, that wasn't fully paid for, that he couldn't supposedly put down on a bond. But it was my son that basically told me about this individual to let him come, that he could be trusted. Or that's what my son said at the time, because he supposedly had a relationship with this individual back years ago. And because of it, I let him in. And the next thing you know, they not only stole a bunch of guns, but they stole a bunch of everything. everything. Basically wiped us out. And if I did not plead guilty to a charge that was being illegitimately accused of, I truly believe that I wouldn't have lost just a little bit of everything, but I would have actually lost everything. They would have wound up with boats, trailers, air compressors, torches, probably pulled this RV that I'm living in off the lot and drug it down the road somewhere and covered it up, and somebody else would have been living out of it. While the neighbors was allowing it to happen. While the courts sat back and laughed about it. One day I'm going to tell my story. My testimony is going to be heard. I may be dead and gone, and people may hear my testimony one day in heaven. But one day, the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, is going to be revealed towards how that my own people backstabbed me, basically shortchanged me, put me out on a limb to dry, and created this treacherous treason towards not wanting to support the founder of the Windmill Ministries, the one that's talking right now, that has led us down this doomsday road of where we are today, towards all the guns, all the violence, all the drugs, all the illegal aliens, all the $30+ trillion that we're in debt. And I could go on and on with the problems that has been developed since the Reagan era. Now, they can get up there and they can play all the games they want with all their little words, all their fancy little words. They can dress up. They can put on their suits. They can put on their nice little dresses and put on their beads and all their little makeup. They can put on the big act. But whenever at the end of the day, in the eyes of God, they're still going to be looked upon as being imposters. At the end of the day, they're still going to be working for themselves rather than working for we the people. And at the end of the day, the people are going to figure out how that they have been scammed. Not just the founder of the Windmill Ministries, but how that this older class, the boomers, have scammed and stolen and taken advantage of, to the point that not only have they stole from people like me, but they stole from their own children and their own children's children by allowing for us to be sold downstream. And they think that ain't nobody onto them. That's the incredible part about it. They actually think that we're so stupid that we are not aware of what has occurred. There's going to be a great deal of people that's going to stand in front of accountability issues come the great white throne judgment. And God's going to ask them some very, very serious questions. And if they do not have some very good answers pertaining to the questions that's going to be questioned to them, I'm just afraid they're going to hear the Lord say, "Depart from me. Depart from me, depart from me, depart from me. For I have never known thee." And that will be one of the saddest days in eternal history for humanity and for eternity, forever and ever. That will be one of the saddest days that will ever come into existence, because of that in which what was formulated by the Luciferian Lucifer himself. He's the one that has brought all the pain and agony. He's the one that is corrupted. He's the one that is perverted. He's the one that has basically contaminated mankind. He's the one that deceived these people in thinking that I was of the devil because that's what they wanted to believe. He was the one that convinced the people that I went into the White House swinging a sword, threatening to cut off one of the president's head. He was the one that convinced people up in western Kentucky after the incident happened here in Martin, pertaining to falsifying files, that I was going to create some sort of electrical disturbance pertaining to shutting down the Kentucky Dam. He was the one that spooked a bunch of people over in Oklahoma that decided that they was going to blow up my personal property and then not pay for it, after them putting me all over their news like I was some sort of could-be, would-be Timothy McVeigh all over again. After that, I had went to Waco and studied that situation for 3 or 4 days that was tied into the Oklahoma bombing, that really and truly, unless you've studied a great deal of history, those that was born after the Waco deal and the Oklahoma deal, which was in 95, people that's now 20, 18, 20, 22, 25 years old, you can start talking to them about Waco or start talking to them about Oklahoma, and they don't have a clue what you're talking about. And there are actually some people out there that you ask them about 9/11, what are you talking about? 9/11, what is that? What happened 9/11? They're out of touch with reality. The same way that this government has been. And now we are where we're at, towards all the crime, added with now the controversy in our political arena, with January the 6th, Donald Trump, and now you just heard Pence get up there and backwash and double talk and pretend that he cares about life. But yet no, if he was the leading president right now, just like Biden, that is still dealing with a known terrorist entity pertaining to a bunch of corrupt, demonic people pertaining to the Saudi Arabians. So when is this going to end? I'm going to tell you when it's going to end. It's going to end when God ends it, and it's coming near a neighborhood near them. They just don't realize how quick and sudden that this is going to occur. This ain't got nothing to do with my timing. It ain't got nothing to do with the United States timing. It ain't got nothing to do with the war in Ukraine pertaining to Russia's timing. This has all got to do with God's timing. And if God has to, he will bring not just this country, but he will bring this planet to its knees, coming near a neighborhood near you. My story, my testimony will be told, and it will be told in the right format, in the right way of what happened, when it happened, where it happened, etc., etc., etc. So all these people around here that humiliated me and demonized me and wanted to put me in some sort of a bubble of either being crazy or a bubble of being a lunatic or a bubble of being a terrorist, the attempts towards what that they have done will be clearly clarified again and again and again, beginning with the White House. Thanks again. Good luck to all of us as we end our program by saying God bless America, God bless our troops on this Thanksgiving, soon to be Eve, 2022, towards all the rumbling, all the controversy, and all the confusion that, yes, as far as I'm concerned, the Luciferian Lucifer is still promoting and still dictating to not only the American people but the world. God bless. May heaven help us all. And as we end by saying shalom. Peace be unto us all.